All right, CNT120, Chapter 3, we're in the last section. We're talking about troubleshooting addressing problems. One of the first things we do is look at Event Viewer. This will show us if we have duplicate IP addresses or IP addressing problems in the network. This would be helpful for troubleshooting that. I would then start using things like, or I should say other resources I can use are things like ping, which is part of the ICMP protocol. Ping is I send a little data packet. If that entity is there and functioning and working, it should respond with a reply. So as I was doing my pings earlier, I was pinging Formula1.com. I had a pathway the whole way there. That entity was working and running and responded back to me along that whole path. So let me know all of that is working. All the layer 1 connection, all the layer 2 connection, all the layer 3 connection from me to that server was functioning. That's what that allows me to do. We will be doing a bunch of that in our lab. We have already done some. We'll be doing a bunch of that in our lab for Chapter 3. And there's lots of different options you can do with ping. We'll do a couple to get you started, but it's going to be kind of a mainstay we use. And here's an IP version for ping. We can do IP version 6 pings as well. If I purposely want to do a IP6 ping on Linux, I'm going to use the ping 6 command. On Windows, I'll use the ping --6 command. And things about commands you want to remember is syntax is unbelievably important. You know, if I do ping with no space -6, I might get an error. So I need to be really cognizant when I'm typing of my numbers and commands I'm using. So watch for typos when you're doing that. And here is a ping -6, the IP version 6 ping that's being done, ping --6. We can use an IP config utility to look at the IP addressing, which we've done already a couple times in this podcast, and you will do in your lab. IP config just gives you the basic IP settings. IP config /all gives you all the details, including the MAC address. IPconfig /release will release a DHCP address, and IPconfig /renew will actually ask the server for a new address via DHCP. That is a way to release maybe something that is old or not correct and pick up the current one. And again, there's some more options in here that can be done as well. On a Linux or Apple computer, I would typically be using ifconfig. That will do a lot of the same functions for me. And here's a couple options for ifconfig that can be done on a Linux or Apple computer. I can use NSLOOKUP. NSLOOKUP will say, hey, name server, what do you know as hack.edu? What is that? And it should respond with at least the IP address of that entity. And that can be used as a way to get information, but it's also be a way to use to check what your DNS servers are handing out. You can say, hey, what do you know as? And if it's handing out good information, awesome. But if it's handing out bad information, then you're like, well, that's why we have a connectivity issue to that resource. And here is a, excuse me, an NSLOOKUP on Cengage.com, just showing what it responds with. And here is an NSLOOKUP of a Google, if you will, in the server 8888. Dig can be done on Mac and Linux. It's the same idea as NSLOOKUP, but on Mac and Linux, you're going to get that information a little bit differently, but it's the same idea. I would use dig instead of NSLOOKUP. So in our lab, we're going to use pretty much all of those to get a feel for how to use these commands. And that's the end of Chapter 3.